I want to talk a little bit about some things I get to learn from my clients at times and principles for living that I actually think are really helpful and things that can be perhaps noted and used for all of us. I had a client once upon a time who we joked about it later throughout the years. The first time I met him, he was full of a lot of bitterness and anger and going through a really bad divorce and just was in the process of basically losing everything in his life. And at that point he did actually, and I won't detail all of what he lost, but it was pretty significant, everything that came crumbling down. And there had been a lot of anger, as I said, and blame shifting and everything. And of course the joke was, as I talked with him and began to recognize some of the abuse that he had put out there toward his family, toward his wife at the time, toward people around him, I began to challenge him in some of those areas. Of course, then I was a BITCH, and he was never going to come back, and he didn't actually for a while anyway. He decided, what do I know? The counselor is obviously no good. And so in the end, he, as I said, experienced a lot of, total breakdown in his life. But as life sometimes deals with us enough, there was that moment of an epiphany for him. And I don't know, at some point he said he later came back to me and said it was like, I realized that all of the problems that had been happening in my life, I really couldn't blame shift them on somebody else, because I was the person that was at the scene of the crime, he said. I was the one that was actually in all of these bad situations. So maybe it has something to do with me. So he began to read a lot of self-help kinds of things and challenge himself, and began to, do work on his temper, went through an anger management program, began to do a variety of things, and began to seek out positive experiences with people around him. And it got to be quite funny because in later years, he would just stop by to fill me in on how good life was and how he had attracted so many positive and fun relationships and good people. And now he had more money than he could have ever believed, after going through all of that mess years before, and how his children had become reconciled in some ways to him. All the things that were not supposed to happen were happening because he was changing a lot of things within himself. And one day I asked him, I said, what are you doing? What would you say are some of the key points that you've done differently? And he said, there are two things I do every single day. I said, what are they? I gotta hear these two things. And he says, the first thing is that I do not talk badly about someone behind their back. I choose not to do that. That's a big key thing. And he said, and I've had a lot of opportunity to do that. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, I have to understand that that's, important for my life as well. But do not talk badly about anybody. And he said, I've had so much opportunity because, my ex would say things to the kids, and then they would come back and tell me, and then I would be, in a situation where I was either going to respond to this or say something, or just, choose to say, that is her opinion or her thing, and I don't have to be invested in that. And that's more often than not is what he chose to do, and began to let go and not respond, especially to respond in a negative way. And so that I'm sure, was a big challenge, but it began to actually undo the negative events that had been transpiring in this man's life. And then the second thing he said he did every single day was that he did something kind for some other human being out there. And whether they needed a hand with something, paint a fence, or help them with a project, or give someone something, or even just a compliment for someone who looks kind of, beat up or run down for the day. He made a mental, conscious decision to do something for somebody else every single day. So he wasn't just living in his own little world. He was choosing to step out and impact others in a positive way. And it was those two things that actually radically began to alter his life circumstances around him and significantly challenged his relationships, his finances, increased him in his work world, increased him in every area. It significantly improved life, and those were just two of the subtle things, obviously, that he did, maybe not so subtle, but two of the significant things that were very life-producing. So sometimes it can be the small things that can do a lot for us, and that's obviously a good thing for all of us to know.